Tennessee. And now, if you get it online, a lot of times the news is, you're behind and other things like that. A lot of people are not watching the local news. They get their information from TikTok. They're not getting all of the basic information. And so things happen and people seem to get lost and they don't know what's going on. And so...
Talk louder?
You want to go ahead? Do I start where I left off?
I don't know what this means.
Okay, welcome. Welcome. We really never know how these things are going to work out. Okay, so I was just telling everybody, the people that are here, that this thing started at a meeting in January of Nashville when a lot of people didn't understand issues. And I asked a bunch of people, and they also didn't understand who their elected representatives were. And it's like, okay, so we got to do something. So with the help of Pastor Fuzz and Judge Robin Kimbrough Hayes, we decided to put on these forums for a couple months to see if they worked. We're not trying to, again, get into advocacy or fighting or anything else. We simply want people to know what's going on. So today's program and the other ones we have planned are designed to inform and educate. These are not partisan. It is not meant to advocate. It is meant to provide people with information so that they can decide, so people can decide what they want. But they know the facts. And if you know the facts, then you can do so much better. So if you watch all this stuff on television, all of it, national, state, and local, people are yelling and screaming and saying things, and you're going like, that doesn't seem to be right. Sometimes it's not. But if you know the process, and if you do know the facts, you're in a much better position to actually make proper change, okay? And so that's what we're trying to do. I teach at Cumberland University. We call that teaching critical thinking. It's a brand new concept. No, it's a concept that people have been talking. Obviously, we've been teaching that for years, but we are trying to bring it back so at least my students, I don't tell them how to vote or anything like that, but they have to think for themselves. When they go into the ballot box, they should know what they're doing, who they're voting for, and what those people stand for. And when they get into the ballot box in November, they're going to be voting on constitutional issues. So they ought to know what those are before they walk in the ballot and go, what are these things? They should know. So that's what we're doing. Again, we want people to be informed. So, having said all that, I want y'all to welcome Lucy Kempf. We are so glad that you are here. We've been friends for a long time. I've always felt like you're fair and you're honest, and if I have a question, you'll tell me if I'm doing something wrong or right, and I believe what you say because I have confidence in your ability. Having said that, tell me about yourself. Tell me why I should believe you, because I always have, but I mean, tell us about yourself, and tell us how you got to the wonderful role of being the director of our planning department.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today, and to Reverend Fuzz and One Nashville. I feel like I'm about to say something that sounds kind of grandmotherly, and I shouldn't, but in my career, the way people receive information has changed radically, and I don't think as a person I've really absorbed that until, the last 5 to 7 years or so, when so much, to your point, of information is now out on X or Twitter or Blue Sky, whatever, and it's really hard to keep up with the narrative and talking to folks. And so doing this and bringing people together just to look each other in the eye and say, what are you hearing and thinking is really helpful. And there's a lot in planning. Planners struggle with just talking plainly because there's a lot technically in planning. And so it's so much better to sit down with people. And so I'm really grateful for this forum. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, during COVID, we were having to fight to talk and communicate. And I remember sitting in my house, like in a room where I was getting good internet access, talking to you about something. And I was grateful for that connection at the time. So I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. And that is a really lovely little city. And
Where in Arkansas?
it's right in the middle.
What's the city's name?
Little Rock,
Oh,
Arkansas.
you grew up in Little Rock.
What do you think? What do you think?
I didn't know what you said. I thought you said rural.
Oh, no.
I can't hear. Okay.
And thank you for making me clarify. I grew up
Okay.
in
Little Rock.
Arkansas.
Yes,
right
I know.
in the center.
I know where that is. We had a president come from there.
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. And so I fell in love with planning. I didn't have the words to describe it because I didn't know what it was. When Little Rock started to make investments in its downtown on the riverfront. And this area, I went to an old downtown church, and it had slowly just lost folks and parishioners. And I saw that in my childhood, and then right when I got in high school, people started to make investments in the waterfront and the parks and bring people together, and I thought it was so cool, but I didn't have a name for it. Fast forward many years and being lost professionally, not really knowing what I was doing in my early 20s. And then I figured out that that was planning, and so I went to planning school in Virginia, and then landed in Washington, D.C. for 12 years, and worked in planning in D.C., which was really wonderful training. But my husband and I both wanted to get back to the part of the country where we were from. He's from Louisville. And I thought that the challenges in Nashville were really compelling. It's just a very interesting moment in its life as a city. Very, very different from D.C. And so we
So
came.
you thought we had challenges?
I think Nashville is such a creative place, and I'm not just talking about the cultural aspects of the city, but how we're confronting the way the city is growing and changing. It's an enormous challenge, not just for a planner, but there's so much opportunity as well. There's so much beauty here that is inherent in the city and the way it's designed and built and situated. One thing DC taught me is that the landscape and the way that the city is formed hundreds and hundreds of years ago is so much about its identity. And Nashville has really lovely characteristics in our natural environment that make us very special. And so figuring out how you uncover that is part of the interesting challenge. So yes, we came here and about 10 years ago, and it has been an honor and a privilege to serve in this role for about 8 years.
It's amazing.
And yeah.
Let me go back for a second, all the way back to your childhood. You understood you liked the idea of what was happening. You were visioning what was happening in the city and what the changes, and you liked that.
I did.
How old were you?
I
mean, it was like 4 or 5 years old?
Well, I grew up, like I said, it was in an old neighborhood that had experienced a lot of change,
Yeah.
old urban neighborhood, historic neighborhood. But yeah, the downtown had faced a lot of disinvestment. It had lost population. And a feeling that a city has when it loses population is so hard psychologically. When I got to DC in 2004, it was gaining in population again for the first time after 40 years of population decline. And the feeling that creates in a city when it starts to contract is really devastating, because you start to ask questions like, can my kids come back and work here? Are we going to have job opportunities? Is our city going to be able to thrive? We've got a lot of vacant. In Little Rock, there were neighborhoods near me that had a lot of vacant homes that had really experienced a lot of disinvestment. And so Nashville has experienced some of those kinds of challenges, but generally has not had a contraction like that. So we have other kinds of challenges. They're just not those. But it humbled me. I think living in cities that had confronted those things and humbled me to the challenges that we have, but also makes me feel excited to get up in the morning.
Well, and obviously we're glad you're here, and we're glad that you're excited to get up in the morning. So tell, I've been thinking about this, trying to figure out the best way to lay this out, and I'll probably just let you talk more, but and explain it the way you want to. But you said something that I thought was interesting, and that is, Washington had its set of history. I mean, it was, 10 miles by 10 miles. It's surrounded by other cities. But there was a pattern. I mean, when you go up there, the Washington Monument, you can see from the Lincoln Memorial. I mean, everything is sort of placed in the right place to see it. And I always like that. I mean, when you walk up there, you don't necessarily notice it at first, but then you start turning around, it's like, wait a minute, everything seems to be set. Take Nashville. Take the overall view of Nashville. We were founded a long time ago by people who stopped in the river and decided to stop here and do stuff. Is there kind of an overall, when Nashville was founded, did somebody sit down and go, well, let's do this over here and here and here, or has it just sort of developed over time and now we have to figure out, based upon where things went, where things should go?
Yes, and. I mean, DC has a very precise way that it was laid out, famously so. And so it has a beautiful but almost neurotic sense of like exactly how everything has to be organized. And it works at a very fine-grained level of detail to imagine itself and change. But it essentially was developed in a way that took advantage of the topography and took advantage of prominent sites and established cultural institutions there and had a very particular street layout. Nashville also set itself up to take advantage of topography. It's got its state houses up on the hill. It's somewhat situated in a bowl, but there's lovely topography in rural areas to the northwest and the southwest, and then we've got flatter water areas, and so we too have been situated and to take lots of advantage of those kinds of things. But Nashville is not built out yet, and so DC has been built out now for 120 years, meaning it's basically had its essential footprint, its streets, and those kinds of things. There are some exceptions. In the 60s, we did a lot of damage as planners and really made some mistakes in DC and in a lot of cities. But Nashville built out, and we started in the core of the city, and then in the 50s and 60s, we made a lot of mistakes. We invested in big streets for cars, didn't invest in sidewalks, and didn't invest in stormwater infrastructure. And so you see 3 decades where we developed, but we didn't develop in a way that was for people who wanted to walk around anywhere.
And why would we do that?
Why
Did
would
we
we want
think
people? Because I think planners were part of basically making it about efficiency, getting everybody quickly by car to where they wanted to go. And efficiency's okay, but we didn't balance that with human needs to walk or to get somewhere quickly, or to have a few different kinds of options for where we wanted to go, which we sort of understood a little more intuitively earlier in the century when the city first was established. So the challenge in Nashville now is to go back and rethink areas that have been developed, for cars and try and reclaim them for people. Because we've heard a lot of residents say, we'd like to be able to walk to our school. We just don't want to get hit by a car. We'd like to be able to walk to our church, but we don't have a sidewalk. And so the city over the last 10 to 15 years has been working to try and kind of fix some of those mistakes, but it's a lot easier to build it right the first time.
So I'm in Salt Lake City, which I assume maybe some other people have been to Salt Lake City. And the thing that I noticed is that they do have very wide streets,
Yes.
big streets, but I also think they have sidewalks.
Yeah.
But because they have such wide streets, they could also build a trolley down the middle of it. And so you could get to the trolley or wherever it is. And so I don't know when they decided to do it, but I look at that as like, well, our streets they may be big, but they're not big enough maybe to handle that at this point. And then we got sidewalk issues. So did we just not have enough land, or do you have any idea why we did this?
I just think you got to prioritize the livability of the city and to have conversations with folks about what does that mean to you. Nashville has an extraordinary opportunity to connect our park system, for example, through greenways and through, sidewalks and other ways to connect us to these really cool parts of our city. The Warner Parks or Beaman Park, you've got these wonderful areas in the Northwest. I mean, the idea that we have really rural parts of our city and around Whites Creek, it's so special. it's so interesting and it's unique, and figuring out how to give people the opportunity to experience those places, have a sense of recognition. I think it's important. I mean, what I worry about and hear about the Planning Commission is it's a little bit of a sense of loss we have in how we've changed. I think some change is good, but the change has to be recognizable to you. And so one of the things I was concerned about when I got here is the way that we treat historic preservation in the city. And it is a big challenge because so much of how we make decisions is about what the state enables us to consider. And there's a lot in Nashville that is about private property rights, meaning what you can do, anyone can do with property that you own. And the state's very protective about that, and it should be. But there are things like that we might have as a community that we care about, like historic preservation. How do you tell a property owner that has a historic asset on Music Row that we as a community really care about, that we don't want you to tear that building down because we value that as our community? And so one of the things we've been trying to understand, and we're going to talk a little bit about zoning, people think a lot of zoning is about just growth. And I think that's a profound misunderstanding of what zoning really is. Zoning is the set of rules that govern what you can and can't do with the property. And you can protect historic resources as part of the zoning process, but you have to come to the table ready to do that earlier than the development's going to happen. So downtown, we've got examples of cases where we've changed the zoning on a project or a property, and we've required preservation of the historic structure, but allowed them to build taller elsewhere. In Cambridge, we went through a really painful process where we had this old farmhouse with a really lovely stone foundation and a stone wall. And my inspectors had been telling us that the house was really falling apart. And the property owner didn't want to save the house, but the community wanted portions of the house saved. How do we as a planning commission force a property owner to keep something that our codes department is saying, has a lot of issues? And so in that case, it may have been an imperfect solution, but we said we want you to save the stone wall and the stone foundation and do a greenhouse or something on the stone foundation. Now, it's not historic preservation, capital H, but it's incorporating, it's making development more interesting. It doesn't have to be stale. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
my crack.
So one of the concerns I always had was, and I don't want to pick on a particular area, but maybe I will. It's where Gary Moore is. That whole area up in Jolton, that whole area off of Whites Creek and maybe Victor Pike, but it's up in the Jolton because that land is so beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the last areas that, it's just such a great part of Nashville. And the concern I always had looking at it as vice mayor was, is it protected? Not, I don't want people to be able to do what they want to with their land. I understand, their rights to their property. But I don't necessarily want someone else from outside of Nashville coming in and going like, oh, there's a lot of land. I think I'll buy it and turn it into an amusement park or something that the people up in that area do not want. And so the overall question is, I think you said it, is that I always notice a lot of times when we run into problems, and there are problems that show up every day in the newspaper, like right now, the zoning, people who know the zoning, people who show up with this stuff and understand how this stuff works, know what they can do and what they can't do. So they do it. And then everybody gets mad and says, why did we let them do it? It's like, but they can do it. So I guess my question is, how do we proactively deal with stuff? It's almost like you have to put everybody, like neighborhoods together. Tawana may do this. You put your neighborhood folks together and you go, okay, what do we want in here? And let's get our council member in here and let's try to figure out if we can change the zoning so that we have some control over what happens. So that, somebody who comes in from, New York or wherever, just picked on New York, They come in and they go, I want to develop it, and I'm going to tell you what I want your city to look like. But you've been there for years. You spent your entire life down there. And so I think the idea is it's their area, they live there. If they could proactively make sure that they've got protections in place so somebody doesn't come in and tell them what it's going to look like, but they kind of set proper standards, smart standards, so that when a developer comes in, it's like, oh, I have to conform. If I'm going to do something, I have to conform with what the neighbors want.
There is so much meat in that question. Let me try. So there's a few different ways the community can come together and set its vision for what it wants. So before I arrived, the Nashville came together and created Nashville Next, which is the general plan of the city, and it sets kind of a long-range plan about the direction we want to go. And it said some really important things. One was there are areas of the city we want to protect. Those were often environmental areas, environmental features, historic properties and the like. And then there are areas where we agree that we want to grow as a city because we think growth and directing growth is important. And I took Nashville Next to say we're open to that, but we want it to be strategic. We want it to be on our corridors. We want it to connect places where you have a lot of businesses and other kinds of resources and get people there quickly. It sounds now when I say that in 20 seconds like, oh, that's just a given, but that was a huge effort. The council members here participated, that Councilman Wiener did, basically saying, this is where we want to go. There are some cities that don't have general plans, and so their planning offices are really making ad hoc decisions. But I'm bound by that National Next vision to make recommendations based on what the community has said. Now, you layer that on the zoning code, which I've mentioned earlier, and that is a set of rules that govern what you can build and what that looks like. So, for example, it says you can have church here, you can have a house, a restaurant, an office building, whatever that is, it's the use. And then it has some constraints around what that looks like, how tall it can be, those types of things. The zoning code, in my experience, is where there's a real sort of, and this was true in DC as well, folks don't understand that as well, and I think it's because the zoning code is a complex document. It's too big. There's a lot of technical terms in there. We do the best we can to make it simple, but it's not, and it's scary. When people talk about zoning, when I walk into a community meeting and I'm going to talk about the Z word, people are mad before I even talk about what it is. You can feel the vibe. And so when you start a conversation and everyone's already upset about zoning, but a lot of it is about, I think, sort of a control as human beings. We're trying to understand what's going to happen in our environment. And a lot of it, in my mind, is about a lack of trust with the government officials who are talking about it. And I get it. This is a hard time to serve and talk about those things. But the zoning code is really the purview of council. And your council member, state law sort of gives them the ability to make those decisions at a legislative level. And so your council member is so important in determining how zoning happens in your district. New zoning. The Planning Commission is responsible really for giving professional advice to council members about land use and zoning decisions, but ultimately we're not the decision maker. There are some exceptions. I won't read subdivision, I won't bore you with that, but really we're an advisory body. And so we're looking at, we have technical information, we use a lot of data. We love maps. But the council member takes that advice and they take your feedback as well and make certain kinds of decisions about how zoning should evolve. And so I think sometimes that's lost in sort of how we think about it. And there's 35 council districts, and council members have very different views of how they want to engage the zoning process,
Oh, sorry. I'll keep this over here.
how they want to engage the zoning process. And so I think that also can create, understandably, lots of questions in the community, because it's like, well, how do we think about change if you have different members who approach managing change differently? And I'm happy to hand the microphone over to Councilman Tanner. Yeah.
Hold my microphone.
Can I give you an anecdote about something? Yeah, I've been babbling, but I want to give you an anecdote about something that's easy.
Well, I was going to say that, I was just going to take my microphone and go in the other room. No, I was going to say that if the people listening on video, or if the people who are here, what you said, I think, is probably the most important thing that you may get out of this entire discussion. Because there is a misperception about how all this stuff works, and then people get mad because people don't fully understand what's going on. I was also going to say, this is not an attempt by the planning department to pass the buck to the council or anything like that. It's just the way it works, okay? And so what I was going to do was, you can give your antidote or whatever it is. But you can also, what I really wanted you to do was go back and say, how does this work? So if somebody wants to build some giant development in a neighborhood, how do they do that? And which goes back to my original point, if you all know what your zoning is, if you know what your house is zoned, what your neighborhood is zoned, if you can look it up, it's on the Planning Commission website. You can go look and see what it is, and then there's probably a key that tells you whether it's residential or whether it could be office space or commercial or whatever. But you can see where it all is. You can also, if you get really good at this, you can look at it and go, okay, this is residential, but it's got an RS by it. What does that mean? Or it's got some parameters on it. What do those things mean? You can kind of know. I think the key in all this stuff is to not be surprised, is to know what it looks like. So, if you live in a house and it's zone R20 or something, and then your neighbor sells their house, and all of a sudden here comes somebody's building two connected, and you're going like, what? How did that happen? That's not supposed to happen. I hate the planning department. It's like, don't hate the planning department. It was sitting there all along. Is that a fair way of saying it? If somebody looked at it and said, well, I can do this. I'm going to tear down the house, and I'm going to follow the zoning requirements.
There are a lot of instances in Nashville where the zoning code is different than what's on the property today. There are a lot of cases in Nashville where the zoning is different than what's on the property today, meaning that if you look at the zoning map and you look at a property, there might be one home on it, but the property enables 4 or offices. When that happens and that home is demolished, then that property owner can develop whatever is allowed in the zoning code, and the planning office will never see it. We saw it 30 years ago or 40, whenever the property was zoned that way. That is probably the single hardest thing to explain. Now, a council member can propose rezonings where that underlying zone, that rule changes. But they have to be judicious about that, because if you had a lot of council members going and rezoning everyone's property without their permission, they're in a whole other heap of trouble. So council members have to, it's a hard job. They got to think, how do I meet the needs of my community, but knowing that there might be some properties that are already allowed to do things that maybe a community doesn't want. And so you can rezone and change that underlying rule, and then planning sees it, and there's a whole way that we invite you as a community to come and tell us what you think. The planning commission cares what you think, say, we use Nashville Next in our guidance. You know how planning is going to look at a proposal. But if it's already allowed, then we won't see it. And so there is so much development that happens in the city based on those rules in the code. And to the councilman, to Jim's point, you can go online and see what zoning is for any property and understand sort of generally what might be allowed there. But again, and I take responsibility for this, the code is really complex. We have tried to simplify it, but it's complex. And it hasn't been comprehensively updated since the 90s, though we've taken strides to update it over time.
Y'all ever, because I do this with my wife, who I don't think is watching, but we will drive down a street and you'll see something, one day you'll see a house, the next day you'll see it gone. And the next thing you see is something that's coming out of the ground that doesn't look like it's supposed to be there, okay? So it may be two houses. It may be two houses right next to each other. It may be completely inconsistent with the neighborhood and be 3 stories, if they can get away with it, of something that just doesn't fit into the neighborhood. And she will turn to me and go, they can't do that. Or that doesn't look right. Where's codes? Or, what happened? And the thing is, they can do that. They can build that. And as long as they're complying with codes, they can do it and get away with it. Does it look right? No. Councilmember Weiner, I may have told her this story, that when people started building duplexes in Nashville, you take you'd either tear it down and then build 2, or you started buying a house and then attaching a whole nother house to it. There was a house, I'm not going to tell you where it is because I don't want to get anybody in trouble, including myself. But there was a house that was a ranch-style house, and they built, I forget what the other thing was. It was like, you can't, that's unnatural. You can't do that. One day I'll drive, whoever wants to, I'll drive around. It's like that. It's like, you can't do that. There's 2 different styles. Even for somebody who has no idea of what styles are, I even noticed it and said this is inappropriate. But that's what they did.
Do you want to hear a weird, okay, so when I first got to Nashville from DC, 90% of the feedback that I got from residents, I did a series of tell me what's on your mind, what are you thinking? And 90% of it was about the tall and skinnies. And I was so interested because it was 90% of what I was hearing, so I was like, we got to figure this out. People are mad. And DC, which has this very precise, if not slightly neurotic way of understanding it, I had never heard in my time in DC any complaints about the townhouses, multifamily, all that stuff that's in DC. Never once had I heard any resident say, we're big mad about how tall that is. And so in Nashville and DC, people get big mad about everything in the built environment. So I was like, this is very interesting. So I went and measured. I sent interns out to measure like 30 tall and skinny buildings throughout the city in every context, and I compared it to the zoning codes in Louisville, DC, Denver, to try to figure out, are we really that out of scale? First of all, is what we're building meeting code? What's going on? And what I came back with was, yeah, we were a little bit taller, but it wasn't remarkably, and context matters, and trees matter. A lot of those cities have alleys. It makes a big difference in how the building presents. But I felt like it was enough of a out of scale that we went and made a recommendation to council in January to lower the heights of these tall buildings. And Jim, I don't think we had a single person speak in favor of doing that. But we had developers come and say, we need these tall buildings. You're taking away our ability to deliver housing, and why are you doing that? And we were trying to respond to the 90% that we get. And so what that taught me was that all the folks who were concerned about that, and Councilwoman Weiner can correct me, may not have understood that text change actually going to uniformly fix or address a really big concern we'd heard, but that there was a disconnect between what we were trying to do and how we were really working to address this in the built environment. Nobody said anything positive about it. And so we won it with council support, but I think they were sort of like, well, nobody seems to care about this actually. But I think the point is a lot of folks get upset about the one development in their neighborhood without necessarily wanting to look at the zoning code itself and figure out what can we change in here. I've been hearing for years, you know, our apartment buildings in the city are just too big. We understand we need a lot of apartment buildings and multifamily and condos, but they're big. And I looked at the zoning code and I said, I agree, we need some small apartment buildings in here as options. We proposed some smaller standard options for apartments and condos. If you go to any historic neighborhood in the city, they've got lots of them. I mean, historic cities, you got lots of small scale quadplexes and townhouses and stuff. So we proposed for the code to have that as just an option. It wasn't meant to be like, and we're doing it everywhere, but it was like, hey, we have a gap here. And the amount of time we had to spend sort of explaining that no, the planning department can't unilaterally rezone property. We have to have council do that, and there's a whole public process for how that works. To your point, I think there was maybe a lot of, people didn't quite understand that they're protected by a lot of steps that are needed to have change, but that the code itself needs to be healed. We need good hygiene in our code. It's got to have good design standards. We should demand that. It's got to have good standards for how tall things are. We got to have that. We can't be afraid to go and take that code and wrestle it down. But if we don't want to look at it because it's complicated, and I can't blame anybody, then it gets really hard. But that's how you change. That's how you address the tall skinny. That I don't think it's quite as out of scale as I think some folks think. But if you're really mad about it, that's how you do it.
Okay, so
does that make sense?
Yeah. So if you've got interested people here, you've got interested people listening, and maybe other people listening, and so people are going like, okay, most people are concerned about what's around them, their neighborhood.
Yeah.
If people really wanted to figure out what was going on before something happened to them, what is the best way to do it?
But can I redirect something happened to them? I mean, I think there's an opportunity for folks to help shape.
Right. So I'm saying before something happens to them,
I am insisting on saying that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before something happens to them, you're sitting in your house, you have nothing better to do. The USA is out of the soccer team, out of the World Cup, and whatever. So you're sitting there and you're going like, there's some property behind me. I wonder if somebody could build a house back there. How do you do that to figure out? Let's say you first of all, how do you go find it? Then you look at it and you go, this is something I don't understand this. Let me go look and figure it out. And then you go, somebody could buy that and build like, what do we call those things? McMansions? Reno, what a McMansion was? Wasn't that what it was? It was like, 10, 12,000 square feet houses, in a neighborhood where it's like, my house is 2,000 square feet, so why am I going to get that? So all of a sudden you look at it and you go, I really don't want that. I really don't want that. How do you go about trying to figure out, first of all, what are the possibilities? And then second, how do you go about, if you can, how do you change it? What is the process so that people actually can figure this stuff out?
So there is a map online. There's a map online. Why are you doing that?
I thought I was going to give you, I thought you wanted this one.
I didn't get to take that over there. Okay, there's a map online. It's called Parcel Viewer. We need some better, more exciting names for things. That you can enter your address in, and you can zoom in and look at information about a property. You could look at yours, you can look at the neighbors, it's all up online. And you can learn about the zoning, you can learn about the policy, meaning what Nashville Next says our goal might be. And you'll already be able to see there areas where what's there today might not match what it's actually able to do. And so if you want to understand how something might be built, then you can go and look at that. One of the things that generated some conversation earlier this year was that the city updated we call them DADUs. I mean, planners have a very big communication problem. That does not sound very good. DADUs, I mean, okay. What these are basically granny flats. They're garage apartments, and we changed the code to enable those more broadly and reduce some obstacles to having those. So as an example, you need to go and look at the zoning code and see what's actually allowed in whatever zone that you see. I want to say something about DADUs for a second. We didn't do that because we thought it was going to solve the housing crisis in our city. We did it because we thought DADUs were one way. They're not every way. It's not meant to be the end-all solution that gives homeowners and others options. I'll share an anecdote with you. When I was growing up in Little Rock, we had a garage apartment, old neighborhood. There are lots of garage apartments in old neighborhoods. And there was an artist that lived there. She taught me to paint. And later, when my dad developed Alzheimer's and had sundowners, which if any of you have experienced Alzheimer's in your family, you know that's when you have a person who's up a lot at night. The garage apartment saved my mom's, I think, health for several years. She went and lived there so that she wasn't up at night caring for him. That's not going to solve a housing crisis. People were sort of asking, well, DADUs are not going to fix affordability. No, but if you need a nurse and you want them to be on site, it would be nice to have that option. If you are a retired person and you want to travel and come back and live kind of near your family and not have to buy another house, that's an option. So a lot of zoning isn't meant to solve all the world's problems. We put a lot of pressure on zoning to fix everything. But it is meant to look at the way people live and give them some choices. And so that's sometimes I think people make zoning out to be everything, and it can't be. It's just more complex than that. But it should be something that helps you have a livable city. Is kind of what I would say. I went all over the place with that. I'm sorry, Jim.
This is a very complicated topic. It is. Okay, but we only have a few minutes before I turn it open for questions, because we're going to finish. Well, what I want to do is make sure that people understand who everybody is. Who are the players in this? Okay, so let's just take an example. Let's say that I live in Bellevue, and I want to change my zoning, okay? And Councilmember Weiner is my council member. And so I am zoned, let's make this easy, and hopefully these are still the same thing. I'm zoned R40, okay, which means the R stands for residential. The 40 stands for 40,000 square feet, which is about an acre. I remembered something from those days. Yeah, okay. Okay, now here's where it gets a little dicey. Okay, so it's R40, and I don't want somebody building two houses on my property, okay, or a duplex. I don't want the R40. I want to change it to RS40, single family home. You got it?
I got it.
Okay, so everybody with me so far? So under the R, somebody could tear it down as long as they could build a duplex or non-attached houses, I guess, if that's allowed. They could build two on that property, right? I don't want that, okay? I'm not for that. I don't want that. So I want to rezone my property to RS. I want to simply add an S to it, which means one house on that property.
I'm locked in. I got it.
You got it.
I'm ready.
I don't care how big it is. It could be a McMansion. I don't really care. I want one house, but I want to change my zoning. What's the first thing I should do?
Okay, what I would do, because you know that the zoning doesn't match your desires, I would go to your council member, the lovely Sherry Weiner, and I would say, would you entertain a zoning to make it so that I have one house instead of two, because my grandchildren are knuckleheads and they're gonna have this one day and blah, 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 whatever. And she'll say, yes or no. And if she says,
Won't she say,
what if she says, yes, I'll consider it, go see planning and see what they think, but I'm gonna make an independent decision, but I'm kinda curious.
wouldn't she first say, what about, have you talked to your neighbors? Is there anybody around?
She might, yes, okay, she's a
So
great
she's
council member, so she'll be like, she'll go talk to your neighbors and see what they think.
Because
And then
she's
there'll
one
be some noodling.
She's one of our better council members, particularly because
Yes,
she's
she'll say,
sitting-
go talk to the, yes. She'll say, and a lot of council members would like community discussion first. So there would be some community conversation, maybe in someone's living room, and she'll kind of get a sense of where everyone is. Let's say that folks are okay with this single structure as opposed to two, and then she might say, okay, I'm willing to entertain this, maybe. Go see planning. Planning will look at it and say, well, it's right here on the middle of a major corridor next to a restaurant. Do we really have to do that? Can't we, what if we added 4 units, Councilwoman? Planning might say that. If it's on a big corridor next to an office, planning might give that advice. Send it up to her, and she says, thank you very much, but I'm not gonna do what planning suggested. This is my district, love your advice. The nice council members will tell us that, but I'm gonna move forward with this zoning or I'm not. You've made your argument. Or planning might say, ooh, there's a major flood zone in the back and we're near a hilly area. We love the idea of reducing density here because look, you're far away from a corridor. We would like to do anything. By the way, could we figure out how to preserve the back of this property for a greenway? Councilwoman, would you help me get that greenway easement through a rezoning? She'd probably say yes. And so then we rezone it, and part of the rezoning is preservation of open space for our park system. But all that is to say, planning gives that recommendation, it goes to the commission, there are rules about that, then we send it up to the council member and it's her call. And most council members will do additional community engagement, discussion, and some of them agree with planning and some of them don't. You want me to talk about SP? Okay.
SP.
Yeah, and so in some really complicated sites, like in environmentally sensitive sites, planning really likes to recommend to council. I know they just wanted to go to RS, but could we do a specific plan, protect this hillside here? Could we negotiate, well, can't negotiate, to be careful, but can we also require greenway easement for parks and then place the house in a really specific area? And the council member often will say, you know, our community was really excited about a greenway over here, so yeah, let's do that.
Okay, we got 5 minutes before I'm going to open it up for 5 minutes worth of questions. So
Okay.
let me take that same analogy, okay? So I really want to bring it down to a single family home. I want to do RS. Talk to the council members, all your neighbors they've all talked about not doing RS. They want to sell their property and build two, and because they can make more money or whatever. And so it's really a problem. But I go like, I am determined. So Councilmember Weiner shows up at the planning department and says, I'm really going to help Jim. He really wants to do this. And then what happens is 800 of my closest friends, used to be my closest friends, all show up and go, no, we don't want that. We hate him. He's not very nice. He has really bad dogs or whatever. So they show up and they start complaining. And the planning commission is sitting there going like, it's a house. What is the planning commission supposed to do? Now, again, because this is happening on all kinds of different things. I'm not going to talk about all the different things that happen. But let's say 800 of my ex-closest friends shows up and goes, don't do it. But the planning commission is looking at it like, it fits in the national next, it's okay, it's its property, we're going to do it. How does the planning commission function?
Okay. If it's a subdivision, in some of the worst cases before the planning commission, actually near Jolton and others, where you have large family farms, that are zoned for duplex, and maybe there are 20. And they're, several hundred acres, and the subdivision isn't a rezoning. It's basically a division of land, and the planning commission is in a judicial role, and that means it doesn't go to council. Planning commission disapproves it because there's 100 neighbors there really, really mad, and planning commission gets sued, and the court says you didn't follow the rules, you violated this property owner's rights, and now you are in trouble and you have to rehear the case. That happens sometimes. The courts have given the commission a little more latitude, I would say, than we understood, but we're vulnerable to litigation, basically, if we don't follow our rules or we're not transparent in a subdivision. Now, if it's a zoning, the planning commission really is supposed to look at Nashville Next. If it's rural policy, for example, we do everything we can to protect the natural features on the site because our subdivision regulations and our policy tell us that's what we have to do. But the commission will sometimes balance the development, the portions of the land that are best and easiest to develop, and give development opportunities there so we can protect the open space. So the commission will look at Nashville Next, and if it's an area of great preservation and conservation, they'll follow that. If it's an area, though, that's for moderate growth, there are some old farms that are near interstates. What do we do? And so then we'll give a recommendation to council, and they'll take it or not.
Okay, so
if it's a rezoning.
just real quick, you all decided to disapprove Councilmember Community. She can still then go up to the council, and as long as she gets her 27 votes, she can pass it on the floor.
Yeah, she has a slightly higher, and council members do. Thank you so much for your recommendation. We don't agree.
We don't care.
We're going to move forward. They have to get a few more votes.
Right, so that's another point to remember, is that you go to the planning department, you go to the planning commission, and they disapprove. They don't like it, doesn't fit in within Nashville Next or with the plans or whatever. The council member can still go, I don't care what y'all think. And the council member can also go, I don't really care what my constituents think. That's why it's so important to keep your council member, make sure that there's open discussions and that people know what's going on, and talk through it. Because I think we've all seen situations where people used to see it where citizens would sit there and go, my council member's not listening to me, and you're going back and have meetings, talk through it, make sure it's done correctly. Last question, and then we'll quickly open it up. Real quick, Planning Commission, they got 800 people screaming at them, but they're looking at the Nashville Next and the other stuff. How do they take into consideration the people screaming at them?
They do. It's the commission that determines whether a proposal meets the subdivision regulations or the Nashville Next policy. So if staff says, we think this site meets Nashville Next, but they hear from 800 people who don't agree, and they make really good arguments about, well, hold on, we're human, we make mistakes, or you can disagree with us. You didn't take into consideration this, important water feature the way you should have, or you needed to do more with the design standards. Commission will hear that, and if they get recommendations that they can easily incorporate into their thinking, they'll do it. And they'll weigh that. They don't always agree with the public, but they definitely don't always agree with staff. So your voice really, really can make a difference to the commission. I think in subdivisions it's harder, because those are a little more ministerial, if you will, just a little, we have to really follow the rules carefully. But for zoning, they listen.
Okay, we got 4 minutes. All right, Twana, I saw you didn't go up first.
Can you speak just briefly about how different agencies within Nashville cooperate with planning to move a project forwards? For instance, we know that water has to be involved, NDOT has to be involved, hopefully NES is somewhat involved. How do all the components come together and decide whether it meets the needs of the community and future development?
So when a rezoning is under consideration, meaning council's entertaining a bill to change the zoning, planning quarterbacks all of those reviews with the agencies. NDOT's making sure you're meeting health safety standards, fire, water, all of that is incorporated into our analysis. And if a single department says this doesn't meet the tests that we apply, then we don't proceed with it. If a project is happening under current zoning, meaning the council member doesn't have a decision and it's one house that's already allowed to be 2 or 3, and that's being reviewed, then touch it, council doesn't touch it, and the same department